What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to look at a super interesting topic that's pretty simple too, and that's known as reflection. We're going to use this mirror API to learn about it, see what it's used for, and all the cool things it can do. So if that sounds good, start by dropping a like down below, hit subscribe, you guys know the drill. That all said, let's jump right in. So we're going to be working in a playground today since it's the easiest place to go through a bunch of examples. So we're going to open up Xcode, file new, and hit playground. Side note, one thing that bugs me is Apple removed the playground button here in the main window, but I'll keep my complaints to myself, maybe for today at least. And we're going to go ahead and call this reflection, since that's what we are looking at, reflection.playground. Go ahead and save it. I'm going to toss it onto my desktop. And first things first, we're going to go ahead and expand our window, and we're going to jump right in. So reflection is called reflection because the purpose of the API is similar to how a mirror is. It's kind of like if you have an object and you kind of reflect it in a mirror, you can get at its values and labels of all of its child properties. Now, that's a great theory explanation. Let's actually do an example to see what the heck that means. So let's say we have a struct. It can be anything. I'm going to use a point, like a coordinate point, and a point has a x and a y. So an x is going to be a CG float, and a y is also going to be a CG float. So nothing too crazy going on here. Now we're going to create an instance of this. So we're going to instantiate points. We're going to pass in a x and an x, or x and a y, I should say. So there's 100, and we'll say 50 for the y. Now, obviously, you can get at the values by saying point.x or point.y, but let's take a look at reflection. So we're going to say reflection equals, go ahead and mirror, and we're going to say reflecting, and we're going to pass in point. Now, this is very similar to how I just described it in the theory of the sense. So we are basically taking the instance of the point thing that we have defined here, and we're saying go ahead and reflect it. Now, this is going to give us a reflection back, and a reflection has children. So we're going to say children is reflection.children, and the name should imply it, but children is an array. And actually, if we take a look at the autocomplete, we'll see it is it says mirror.children because Apple type aliased this, and it's not really useful, but it is an array. And the point is we can do for child in children, and off of each of these things we have a label and a value. So I'm going to start by printing them out. So we're going to say the label is going to be child.label, and the next thing is going to be child.value. So let me go ahead and toss a line break after this, and we're going to simply go ahead and run this playground. Hopefully it decides to do its job. So we'll open up this bottom panel with a Command-Shift-Y, and I'm going to hit that play button. So this is more or less the crux of what reflection and mirroring is. We're going to take a look at some more useful examples momentarily, and also how you can wrap this in a generic function. That way you don't have to write out boilerplate code every single time. If your playground is being super slow, like mine is at the moment, you might want to toss this in a function and call that function, since that tends to get it working. So let's go ahead and put this in a func called go. We're going to say go here. We're going to print out started. We'll toss all that in here, and I'm going to call this down here. It looks like it decided to go after I moved it to the function, but the label and value we're getting is, so the label is the property name, so X, and the value is 100. And in this case, the label is Y, and the value is 50. So basically what you expect it to be, nothing too crazy. Now, why is this useful? Well, let's take a practical example. So let's say we have a object that represents some type of cache. So let's say this is a person, and let's say person has a let's say a name on here. We can toss a name on this guy. We'll say name, and person also has a thing that allows you to reset the person, whatever reset means in your context. So let's create a protocol up here. We're going to say resettable. And once again, this is just a simple example. You can use anything for that matter. And let's say there's a function in here called reset. Now, this could mean literally whatever, or this can actually also be a class called resettable, just like that. I'm going to toss an initializer on here. And let's say this has a instance on here called resetter of type resettable. Now, resettable presumably resets something. So bear with my example here. Looks like this is yelling at me for some reason. So let's see. So in here, we're just gonna print out you reset a person. Now, let's say we have a bunch of object instances and we don't quite remember every single thing that is resettable. Or in other words, we don't want to have to remember, right? We want to pass in an array of a bunch of different types of objects. Maybe it's a dictionary, maybe it comes from Codable, and we want to intelligently check all the things that are resettable. And if it is resettable, if it has this resettable type on it, we want to call reset. So how do we go about doing that? So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and delete all this stuff in here. And we're going to go ahead and say, let's person is going to be a person. We're going to instantiate this with a name. Let's try that one more time. Name, I'm going to toss in my name there. And once again, we're going to reflect it. So we're going to say R is mirror reflecting person, just like that. Should be person, not persons, no plural. And now what we can do is we can for loop over those elements again. So we can say for a child in r.children. And the beauty of this is you can actually try to cast each of the values to the associated type. So we can say guard let resetter is child.value as resettable. And if we have that resettable, or if we don't rather, we're just going to continue in our for loop. But if we do have it, we're going to say resetter.reset. And the coolest thing about this is you don't need to know what all the values are. You don't need to know what all the types are in your object in question here. All you care about is writing a for loop. Now, you want to be mindful about how you use this, and some objects might be enormous, and you don't want a for loop outrageously over massive objects. It might be a performance consideration. So let's go ahead and give this a run. And what we expect to see is we expect this to get printed out. You reset a person. Now, if you take a look here, it started, and then we get you reset a person, presumably because as it was for looping, it got to this thing here. It was a resetter, and it tried to cast it as a resettable. So this is a good example. Now let's take it one step further. So here we're going to get into some generics. So we're going to extend the mirror object here, and basically what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a static function off of this guy. And what we want to be able to do is create a function that we can say reflect this instance and try to match against this type of type. That way, let's say you care about all the strings and integer values in an object and you don't want to have to write for loops over and over again. You want a better way to do it. So we're going to go ahead and say match t being our generic type. And we're going to pass in 3 arguments. For thing, so thing is going to be any, the thing we're basically matching over. The next thing we're going to do is matching, and this is going to be t.type, and by default it'll be the self variant of t, so bear with me here. And then essentially if we match against t, so let's say we're looking for strings, and we have found t, what we can go ahead and do is call it and return it via a closure. So we're going to say block is going to be an escaping block that returns t and void. In other words, if we call this match function on something like an object with 5 integers and we say find me all the integers, what we expect to happen here is this block should get called 5 times, where t is the parameter coming back of all those integers. So how do we actually use this in practice? Well, the first thing we want to do is actually reflect our thing. So we're going to say reflection equals mirror reflecting thing. And this is why I use the terminology of thing. Don't actually use that in your application, please. So now we have a reflection of it. Now the next thing that we want to go ahead and do is say for child in reflection.children. And we're just going to basically now do the cast. So we're going to say if let child.value, basically if let type, or maybe I'll call it match, is child.value as t, Then what we can go ahead and do is simply return it in our closure. So we can say block, and we're going to go ahead and return our match, which is our child.value, because we're casting it to t here. And that's basically how you can genericize this mirror API. Not super complicated, hopefully. Let's actually use this in practice and see what we end up with. So I'm going to use this go function again. I'm just going to move it down below. And we're going to use a different object. So let's say we have a object that represents perhaps something like measurements. So maybe this is an application where somebody can store a bunch of measurements. Maybe we'll say heights, CG floats, width is, let's do float instead, floats. We'll maybe then go ahead and say, I don't know, weight, and this can be integers, and we can say depth, and this could be integers as well. So let's say I have an instance of this, and what I want to do is I want to get back all the things in here that are of type integer. Now, instead of writing for loops everywhere, we're just going to use our one for loop in our generic function. And what we can go ahead and do in here is say our measurements, so our measurements is going to be an instance of this guy. So we're going to go ahead and pass these all in. So we're going to say maybe 12.2, 32.1. Now this is a integer, so we're going to say maybe 101, and here we'll say like 7. So now that we've got this, we're going to get all the integers out. So we're going to say mirror, go ahead and match, and we're going to call this one here. So we can say match, and we're going to say we want to match for the thing. What thing do we want to match for? Which is measurements. Now we want to go ahead and match for int.self. The next thing we want to do is actually declare this block here, and you can see that we get t in, so we're going to say match in, and I'm simply going to print out the match in this loop with a line break. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we expect to find all the integer values that we get back. So let's go ahead and give this playground a run, and then we'll wrap it up. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it there. We'll go ahead and hit play. And we'll wait for Xcode to be slow, and it looks like it's found 101 and 7. Now, this is obviously a very simple example. You can actually scale this quite nicely. I've personally used this in implementations of extending Codable, where you can take an object that maybe you can't conform to Codable to do some JSON encoding, and you can get at the labels and values of that object, and you can write a pretty intricate version of Codable yourself without having to use encodable or decodable. Mirroring is a really simple concept at first glance, but it can drive a ton of powerful implementations and concepts. In fact, there's a really good GitHub repo somewhere that I'll hopefully find a link in the description down below if I can find it, that goes through some pretty advanced examples and explanations. So that is all I've got for you guys today. Pretty quick and short video, hopefully made sense. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of mirroring. I think it's pretty cool. I was pretty obsessed with it when I found out about it. Hit that like button if you haven't done so already. Hit subscribe if you want to stick around for new videos. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.